There is a writer who almost made sure we could never read his work. Work that remains relevant in our lives today. A work that exposes the feelings we still carry to this day. The feeling of guilt without knowing why. The feeling of being judged before knowing the charge. The feeling that everyone understands the rules, except you. Kafkaesque. That is what Franz Kafka felt throughout his entire life, poured into books he wanted burned to ash before his death. Franz Kafka was born in Prague in 1883, the son his father wanted to make a businessman, who instead became a government clerk and wrote at midnight. In 1917, tuberculosis reached his lungs. 5 years before that, he'd already written down exactly how it would feel to be sentenced by something he couldn't fight. The Judgment. This was the first story Kafka wrote in a single sitting that he didn't destroy. September 22, 1912. He sat down at 11 p.m. and finished at 6 in the morning. He wrote in his diary afterward that it felt like a complete opening, out of the body and the soul. It's a short story about a young man named Georg who has a good life, a business, a fiancé, a future. He visits his aging father to share some good news. The father, bedridden and supposedly failing, sits up, pronounces judgment on his son, and sentences him to death by drowning. Georg walks out and obeys. The story gives you no reason. There's no logic to the authority the father holds. You know that feeling when someone, a parent, a boss, a system, holds power over you and you can't quite locate where it comes from? You just know it's real, and you don't push back. Kafka called that night the breakthrough moment of his writing life, and it wasn't even the darkest thing he'd write yet. The Metamorphosis. The opening line lands without setup. Gregor Samsa wakes up one morning from uneasy dreams and finds himself transformed in his bed into a monstrous insect. There's no explanation, no before and after. What happens next is this. Gregor watches his family slowly reorganize around his absence. His father gets a job, his sister starts playing violin again. They begin calling him a burden. They mean it. What if the transformation isn't the horror story? What if the family's relief is? The Metamorphosis is a book about what happens when someone becomes, in the eyes of the people who depend on them, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be known. That's a story you can read in an afternoon. Then you'll think about it for years. But the novels he considered his most important, the ones he was most desperate to destroy, were still ahead. The first of them starts with a man arrested for a crime no one will name. The Trial. The Trial was written in 1914, but never completed. Kafka started it, set it down, came back, set it down again. When he died, Max Brod assembled the chapters in the order he believed Kafka intended and published it the following year. Joseph K. is arrested on his birthday. The charge is never named. The court has no fixed address. The law is referenced constantly, but never shown. The process is the punishment. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew something was wrong, that some judgment had been made about you, but you couldn't find anyone to answer for it? Where the more you asked, the more you seemed to confirm the problem. That is the entire architecture of The Trial. The Trial gave us a man trapped in a system of judgment with no clear source. A few years earlier, Kafka had tried to trace that system back to where it actually started. Letter to My Father. Not a novel, not a story. A 100-page letter Kafka wrote to his father and never delivered. Hermann was a large, loud businessman who'd built himself up from nothing and had no patience for his son's writing. He is confident, demanding, dominant. Franz Kafka was his opposite in every possible way. He gave the letter to his mother to pass along. She handed it back unread. He filed it in a drawer. Max Brod found it after his death. Read this, and The Trial stops looking like surrealism. Every wall that can't be scaled, every authority that never explains itself, every verdict handed down without a charge. It's one man expanded to the size of the universe. The letter isn't an accusation. It's an attempt to explain how his father's authority was a perfect weapon to control every decision Kafka made, for 40 years obeying a force he never once questioned, until he sat down to write this. The castle. Kay arrives in a snowbound village as a land surveyor hired by the castle on the hill above town. He can see it from the square. He cannot reach it. Every attempt to contact the castle's officials is redirected, delayed, or quietly forgotten. His appointment can't be confirmed. His presence in the village can't be explained. The people who claim access to the castle don't have it. The people who actually have access won't meet with him. The difference between this and the trial is crucial. Joseph K. is being punished. Meanwhile, K. is just trying to do his job. The system here isn't against him. It's indifferent. It was never designed with him in mind at all. Kafka wrote The Castle in 1922, the year his tuberculosis forced him to retire from the insurance office. He was working on borrowed time. He never finished it. The manuscript ends mid-sentence. Most readers find The Castle the most unbearable of the three novels, not because it's the darkest, but because The Castle is so obviously not fictional. A Hunger Artist. In the final year of his life, Kafka published a story called A Hunger Artist in a literary magazine. He was correcting the proofs from his sanatorium bed. A professional faster, a performer who sits in a cage in a public square and refuses to eat, for days, then weeks, finds that the audiences have stopped coming. Public interest in fasting has evaporated. He keeps fasting anyway. He can't stop. Near the end, someone asks why he kept going even after everyone left. He says he had no choice. He never found food he actually wanted. This time, Kafka wasn't writing about someone else's hunger. He was writing about his own. Tuberculosis had spread to his throat. Swallowing became unbearable, then impossible. He starved to death in June 1924. He was a man who had spent his life producing work he thought was worthless, for audiences he couldn't reach, burning most of what he finished, and unable to stop. He kept writing because he couldn't locate anything else he actually wanted to do. Kafka wrote the same theme across his entire career, but in different shapes, different scales, different settings. He wrote that because he lived it. 14 years at an insurance company. Fiction written between midnight and 3 a.m. because his family needed him to be the responsible son during daylight. The man who spent his career writing about guilt without crime, about trial without charges, about being seen but unconfirmed. That's why these books feel different from other literature. They're not observations of alienation, they're confession, written by someone who was there, who never fully escaped, and who left us with everything he insisted to burn.